The body was still warm when the signal reached the Council. A Vreth patrol ship, designation R7, had gone silent near the outer edge of the Vargon sector 3 days ago. When the recovery team arrived, they found the hull torn open from the outside, not by weapons fire, not by an asteroid. The metal was peeled back like skin in long strips with claw marks running the full length of the port side. Inside, 14 crew members. None of them had made it to the escape pods. The council chamber on Vel Station filled fast. Representatives from 11 species crowded the long curved table, their translators buzzing with overlapping voices. The Krellian admiral, a tall, gray-scaled creature named Voss, placed the incident report on the central display without a word. Everyone in the room already knew what had done this. They had all seen this kind of wreckage before. Duskwolves. The word alone changed the air in the room. A Vreth diplomat shifted in his seat. 2 of the smaller species, the Polari and the soft-spoken Unri, moved their chairs slightly back from the table, as if the image on the screen could reach them. Duskwolves were native to Vargan Prime, a death world at the far edge of mapped space. The planet had 3 times standard gravity, a toxic lower atmosphere, and enough predatory fauna to kill an armored survey team in under an hour. Out of everything that lived there, Duskwolves were the worst. They averaged 4 meters at the shoulder, moved in coordinated packs, and had never once been successfully driven off, captured, or reasoned with. 40 years ago, a Krellian terraforming fleet of 9 ships had attempted to establish a colony on Vargan Prime's northern continent. The wolves had destroyed every ship within a week. There were no survivors. The fleet's final transmission was 11 seconds of screaming, and then silence. The Council had classified Duskwolves as apex uncontainable after that. The protocol was simple. If Duskwolves were confirmed in a sector, you left the sector. Admiral Voss pulled up a star map. A red zone pulsed around the Vargon sector, wider now than it had been 6 months ago. "They are moving," he said. R7 was attacked 4 light hours outside their previously mapped range. If the boundary has shifted, 3 active colonies are now within reach. The room erupted. Sarah sat at the far end of the table in the junior observer section, a datapad balanced on her knee. She was a human liaison attached to the Council's Xenobiology division, and she had been in that chair long enough to know that the next 30 minutes would be a lot of noise before anyone said anything useful. She noted the claw measurements from the R7 report, large, but not the largest on record. She noted the attack pattern. The hull had been struck from multiple sides simultaneously. Pack behavior, coordinated. She was still writing when the communication desk on her left lit up. A voice came through the open channel, low and unhurried, with the mild static of a long-range signal. "Vel Station, this is the freighter Ardent Claws out of Moran Dock. I'm currently sitting in geosync above the Felden colony, Vargon sector, grid 7. Just wanted to flag something." The comms officer looked up. "Go ahead, Ardent Claws. There's a Duskwolf on the surface, down near the colony's eastern water processing unit. Looks like it came in from the tree line sometime in the last few hours. Colony personnel are sheltered inside and accounted for. Wolf is just sitting there." The council chamber had gone quiet. Voss leaned toward the feed. "Ardent Claws, confirm your status. Are you still in orbit?" "Yes, sir," the voice said. "Well, I was." A pause. "I've landed." Someone at the table said something sharp in Krellian. Voss's translator did not catch it, but the tone was clear. "Ardent Claws," the comms officer said carefully. "We strongly advise you remain aboard your vessel and await evacuation escort." "Understood," said the voice. Another pause, longer this time. The channel stayed open. Sarah could hear wind on the other end, and the low, ambient sounds of a planet's surface. The man had already stepped outside. "My name is Darren," he said, more quietly now, as if he didn't want to speak too loud. "I'm a licensed freight pilot, no military, no weapons clearance. I've got a med kit and a week's worth of ration packs." "Ardent Claws, what is your current position relative to the animal?" "About 40 meters, Darren said. "Maybe 35 now." The Vreth diplomat stood up. "This man is going to die." Sarah didn't answer him. She was watching the feed coordinates on her pad, tracking the signal. She pulled up the colony's exterior camera on her secondary screen. The image was grainy, low-res, long-distance, but she could see it. The wolf, massive and dark against the pale ground, sitting at the edge of a concrete barrier, and a small human figure walking slowly across the open space toward it, not running, not armed, just walking. "He's not trying to tame it," Sarah said, mostly to herself. The Unri delegate beside her turned. "Then what is he doing?" Sarah watched Darren stop, crouch low, and go still. "He's letting it decide," she said. The whole chamber watched in silence. Nobody left. Nobody spoke. For the first time in the 40 years since the Krellian fleet had gone silent, something was happening near a dusk wolf that wasn't a casualty report. It was just a man, sitting very still in the wind, waiting. Nobody on Vel Station moved. The colony's exterior camera was still running, and someone at the comms desk had patched it to the main display. The entire council chamber was watching a single frame, a human crouched in the open, 40 meters from the most dangerous predator in the known galaxy, doing absolutely nothing. The dusk wolf had not moved either. It was sitting on its haunches near the water processing unit, its head lowered slightly, ears forward. Even through the grainy feed, the size of it was hard to process. Its shoulder came up to the top of the barrier beside it, and the barrier was 2 meters high. The fur was dark gray with patches of deep brown along the spine, and there was a wound visible on its left flank, a long gash that had dried, but not healed cleanly. Darren's voice came through the open channel, barely above a whisper. "It's looking at me, not a fixed stare, just checking. That's different from targeting." "Different how?" Sarah asked. She had moved to the comms desk without quite deciding to. "A fixed stare means it's already committed," Darren said. "This is more like it's reading me, trying to work out what I am." Admiral Voss crossed his arms. "It knows what you are. It has killed your kind before." "It's killed people who came at it with weapons and noise and fear," Darren said, still quiet. "That's not what I am right now." He reached slowly into the pack on his shoulder and took out a ration block. He held it at his side for a moment, then tossed it gently onto the ground, about 10 meters in front of him, not toward the wolf, just out, into the space between them. Then he sat down on the ground, cross-legged, and put his hands on his knees. The wolf looked at the ration block, then back at Darren. "It won't eat that," the Vreth diplomat said. "I know," Darren said. "That's not why I threw it." Sarah understood before he explained. The throw was slow, non-threatening, and the food landed in neutral space. It wasn't an offering so much as a signal. "I have things. I chose not to use them as weapons. Here is proof." She wrote it down on her pad, her handwriting faster than usual. An hour passed. The wolf did not approach the ration block, but it did not leave either. At one point it stood and every person in the council chamber tensed. It walked 3 paces to the left, sniffed the air, then sat again in a slightly different spot. It had moved on its own, 2 meters closer to the middle ground. "Did you see that?" Darren said softly. "We saw it," Sarah said. "It's curious," he said. "Not hungry curious, just curious." The Krellian admiral made a sound that his translator rendered as deep skepticism. "You are describing emotional states in a creature that destroyed 9 ships." "With respect, Admiral," Darren said. "Your ships came in loud and armed and pointed straight at its territory. I came in quiet and sat down on the dirt. It's having a completely different experience right now." Nobody had a response to that. By the 3rd hour, Darren had not moved from his spot except once, slowly, to stretch his legs. He talked intermittently, not to the council, just out loud, low and even. He talked about the weather on Morandoc, about the cargo he was supposed to deliver to Felden Colony, about a dog he'd had growing up, a large brown animal named after a river, who used to sleep on his feet in the winter. The wolf's ears shifted when he talked. Not alarm. Something else. "Why do you keep talking?" the Unri delegate asked Sarah, as if she had the answer. "Sound with no aggression in it," she said. "It lets the animal learn your voice without associating it with a threat." You sound like you've done this. Humans have, she said, for a very long time. 4 hours in, Darren opened another ration pack and ate it himself, slowly, in plain view. He made no sudden movements, chewed, swallowed, folded the wrapper and put it back in his pack. Routine behavior, non-predatory signals. 20 minutes after that, the wolf stood again. It walked forward. Steady, deliberate pace. Not a charge, not a stalk. It stopped 6 meters from Darren and lowered its head to sniff the ration block on the ground. Still didn't eat it. Raised its head and looked at the man sitting in the dirt in front of it. Darren did not stand, did not reach out. He turned his face slightly to the side, not looking away, just breaking the direct eye line. Easy, he said, very softly. I'm not going anywhere. The wolf sat down. 6 meters away from a human being, in open ground, it sat down. The council chamber had been silent for so long that when someone finally made a sound, it startled 3 people. It was the Vreth diplomat, and the sound he made was not a word. It was something that his translator couldn't catch, something involuntary. Sarah looked at the feed for a long time before she wrote anything. Then she wrote, "Subject demonstrates wound on left flank. Subject sat nearest to the human after assessing possible self-selection for proximity to a perceived safe entity." She underlined the last 3 words, then thought about it and underlined them again. Outside, on a cold planet at the far edge of mapped space, a freight pilot sat on the dirt in the fading light, and a dusk wolf sat 6 meters away from him, and neither of them moved, and for the first time in 40 years, nobody was dying. Morning came on Vargan Prime before it came to Vel Station's artificial cycle. The colony's camera caught the light changing, pale gray first, then a slow amber that rolled across the open ground. Darren had stayed through the night. He had moved once to pull a thermal sheet from his pack, wrapping it around his shoulders without standing. The wolf had watched him do it. Then it had lowered its head onto its front paws and slept. In that way, large animals sleep. Not deeply. One ear still moving, breath slow, but ready. When the feed updated at first light, the wolf was 4 meters away from Darren instead of 6. It had moved closer in the dark. Sarah had not slept. She was at the comms desk with a cold cup of something that had been warm 3 hours ago, her datapad covered in notes. When Admiral Voss arrived for the morning session, she was already on her feet. "I want to address the council," she said. Voss looked at the feed, then at her. All right. She had prepared something for moments like this. Not this specific moment, she hadn't imagined this specific moment. But she had spent 2 years in the xenobiology division building a case she suspected no one would want to hear. Now they had no choice but to sit still for it. She pulled up the first image. Earth. Old photographs, the kind that came from ground level. A human child, small and soft-looking, sitting in the grass with a large gray wolf resting its chin on the child's knee. "This animal," Sarah said, "is the direct ancestor of a species humans kept in their homes, slept beside, trusted with their children." She let that land. The wolf was the first apex predator ever domesticated by any species, anywhere in the recorded biological history of this galaxy. And humans didn't do it by breaking the animal or caging it. They did it by living near it, over a very long time, until the wolves decided that humans were worth being near. The Polari delegate made a small sound. "They chose it?" "Both sides chose it," Sarah said. "That's the part most species miss. Humans didn't conquer the wolf. They made themselves trustworthy to it. They learned to read its signals. They let it set the pace. They were patient in a way that, frankly, most species in this room are not built to be." She moved to the next image, a Krellian survey record from 40 years ago. The fleet approach to Vargon Prime, ships in tight formation, weapons hot, communication signals blasting on broad spectrum. "This is what every species in this galaxy has done when it encountered dusk wolves," she said. "You came in as a threat. You moved in groups, made loud signals, pointed weapons, and advanced on their territory without pausing. And the wolves responded to that threat the only way they know how." She set the datapad down. They were never mindless killers. They were animals responding rationally to what they perceived. The chamber was quiet. On the surface, Darren was awake now. He had eaten slowly in full view of the wolf. Then he opened his medkit, not quickly, taking each item out and setting it on the ground beside him. The wolf watched. Its ears moved. When Darren held up the antiseptic cloth and turned toward the wound on the wolf's flank, he didn't move toward it. He just held the cloth out, visible, and waited. The council watched him wait. 11 minutes passed. Then the wolf stood, slowly, and walked to Darren. It stopped within arm's reach and turned its body so the wounded flank was facing him. Someone at the table made a sound like a sharp intake of breath. Darren didn't rush. He reached out one hand, let it rest near the wound without touching, watched the wolf's response. The wolf was still. He made contact, gently, cleaning the edge of the gash in slow, careful strokes. The wolf's breathing stayed even, its eyes half closed. "It's letting him," the Unri delegate said, barely audible. It walked to him and let him. "It's in pain," Sarah said quietly. "And it decided he was safe. That's not nothing. For any species, that's not nothing. But for a duskwolf, based on everything we've recorded about them, that should be biologically impossible." She paused. "It isn't impossible. We just never gave them a reason to make a different choice." Voss had not spoken in over an hour. He was watching the screen with his arms still crossed, but something in his posture had shifted. He was a military creature, built for threat assessment, and everything about what he was watching scrambled that instinct. There was no threat to assess. There was just a man and an animal and a wound getting cleaned. "What is he doing now?" Voss asked. Darren had started talking again, low and even, the way he'd been talking all night. The wolf had lowered itself to the ground beside him, wound, treated, and Darren had one hand resting lightly on its neck. "Honestly," Sarah said, "I think he's just keeping it company." Voss looked at her. "That is the most dangerous animal in the known galaxy." "Yes," she said, "and right now, it's choosing to lie next to a human being." She looked back at the screen. "That tells you more about humans than it does about the wolf." Nobody argued with that. Outside, the amber light had gone full gold. Darren sat with his hand on the wolf's neck, talking softly about nothing in particular, and the wolf breathed slowly and did not move away. The tree line moved. It was subtle at first, a shift in the dark space between the tall gray trunks, something in the shadows that hadn't been there before. The colony camera caught it on its slow pan, and the analyst watching the feed at Vel Station sat up fast and switched the image to manual. 3 shapes, large, moving in from the eastern side, low and quiet, fanning out without any visible signal between them. Not charging, not running. Moving the way water moves around a stone, steady, deliberate, covering ground without wasting it. More dusk wolves. The council chamber went loud immediately. 2 delegates stood. The Vreth commander was already calling for evacuation clearance on the colony. Someone else was requesting weapons authorization for an orbital strike, a request that was shut down in seconds, partly because the colony was directly below and partly because Darren was still sitting on the ground out there and the feed was still live, and everyone could see him. He hadn't moved. "Ardent clause," the comms officer said sharply. "We are reading 3 additional subjects approaching from the east. Please return to your vessel immediately." "I see them," Darren said. "Then you understand." "They came from downwind," Darren said. "They've known I was here since last night. If they were coming to attack, they wouldn't be walking." The animals at the tree line stopped about 30 meters out. They were bigger than the first wolf, broader through the chest, with the kind of build that meant they hadn't been sick or injured in a long time. Their eyes caught the light. Gravel, the name Darren had started using for the first wolf, for the low sound it made when it breathed, stood up. Not in alarm. It turned toward the 3 newcomers and made a sound, low and rolling, nothing like a growl, more like a question. The largest of the 3 newcomers answered with the same sound. "Pack communication," Sarah said from the comms desk, writing fast. The first animal is signaling to the others, possibly identifying Darren as known, non-hostile. You're guessing, Admiral Voss said. I'm reading behavior, she said, but yes, partly guessing. On the surface, Darren turned sideways, not toward the newcomers, not away. He made himself small and non-angular in the way he held his arms, hands open at his sides. He did not stand. He let gravel stand in front of him, not because he positioned the wolf there, but because the wolf had simply moved that way. The three newcomers crossed the open ground. They approached gravel first, the way wolves do. Scent check, low sounds, a brief physical contact of heads. Then the largest one raised its head and looked past gravel directly at Darren. The council went absolutely silent. The large wolf walked forward. Not fast, just walking, the way it had walked from the trees. It stopped 1 meter from Darren and lowered its enormous head until they were level, the wolf's nose at Darren's eye line, its breath visible in the cold morning air. Darren did not flinch. He turned his face slightly to the side, showing the curve of his neck, the oldest signal there was, in the body language of pack animals, the one that meant, I am not here to challenge you. He kept his hands still. The wolf pressed its head against Darren's chest, not aggressive, not testing. It simply rested its head there, all that weight and size, against the chest of a human who had arrived alone in a freight ship the day before. Nobody in the council chamber breathed. He's being accepted, Sarah said. Her voice was very steady. That contact, that is an acceptance gesture in pack social structure. The dominant animal is marking him. The Vreth commander had sat back down at some point without anyone noticing. He was watching the screen. His translator caught nothing from him for a long time. Then, how? It wasn't a question with an upward tone. It was the kind of word that comes out when understanding breaks and something needs to be said to fill the space. They're pack animals, Sarah said. Pack animals do not permanently stay at maximum aggression with everything they encounter. They assess. They rank. They include. She turned to face the room. Every species in this chamber encountered dusk wolves as a threat and treated them as a threat. You got threat behavior back. Darren came in with no weapons, no aggression, no noise. He sat with one of them while it was injured. He cleaned its wound. He shared food in its presence. She looked at the screen. He became legible to them. Not prey, not rival. Something else. And once pack animals find a category for something, they act on it. What category? The Unri delegate asked. On the screen, Darren had slowly raised one hand and rested it on the large wolf's neck, the way he'd rested it on Gravel's. The wolf was still. The other three had settled into the open ground around him, not circling, just present, the way a group at rest arranges itself around a shared center. Sarah watched for a moment before she answered. Pack, she said. The chamber stayed quiet for a long time after that. Outside the viewport of Vel Station, stars moved slowly. On a planet at the edge of known space, a freight pilot with no weapons and a week's worth of rations stood at the center of a duskwolf pack in the early morning light, and the wolves were calm. The research team landed 3 weeks later. It took that long because the council argued about it for 2 weeks, then spent a third week drawing up safety protocols that Sarah scrapped and rewrote twice. The final version was 6 pages long and could be summarized in 4 words. Follow Darren's lead. He was still there when they arrived. The Ardent Claws sat at the edge of the colony's landing pad, its hull a little dusty, a new dent along the cargo bay door that hadn't been there before. Darren met the shuttle on foot. He looked fine, a little thinner, a little more comfortable in his own skin than most people look after 3 weeks alone on a death world. He shook Sarah's hand and nodded at the 3 xenobiologists behind her and said, Keep your voices down when we go out. Move slowly. If one of them comes to you, let it. Has that happened? One of the researchers asked. Not yet, Darren said, but you're more people than they've seen at once. They'll need time. The pack had settled into a loose range around the colony's eastern side. They didn't come close to the buildings, but they didn't avoid the open ground between the tree line and the outer fence either. It was, Sarah noted in her first field entry, a boundary they seemed to have chosen themselves. What the research team found over the following weeks did not match any of the existing Duskwolf literature. What existing Duskwolf literature there was amounted to attack records, damage assessments, and a few long-range thermal scans from ships that had not lingered. Nobody had ever spent time near them. Nobody had ever been able to. The pack had clear social structure. There was a dominant pair, the large wolf Darren called Ridge, and a slightly smaller female the team cataloged as Subject F2, though Darren called her Flint for the way her eyes caught light. Below them, 3 adults with distinct roles in patrol and hunting coordination. And Gravel, the first wolf who occupied a slightly unusual position in the hierarchy, not dominant, but not subordinate either. Gravel moved freely between all the others. Sarah suspected it was the pack's youngest adult, still finding its rank. They mourned. That was the finding that stopped the team cold on day 9. One of the adult wolves, a large male the researchers had been tagging as Subject M3, came back from a solo range with a deep puncture wound on its shoulder. It died 2 days later. The pack gathered and did not leave the body for 6 hours. Ridge lay beside it. The sounds they made were not alarm calls, not territorial markers. They were low and sustained and unlike anything in the existing audio catalog. Darren sat with them from a distance, and at some point Ridge came to him and pushed its head against his shoulder, and Darren put his arm around it and didn't say anything. Sarah wrote for a long time that night. She wrote about the morning. She wrote about the cooperative hunting patterns she'd observed, the way 2 wolves would split off in opposite directions to push prey toward a third waiting in cover, behavior that required planning, not just instinct. She wrote about the way Flint would bring back food and distribute it to the others before eating herself, always the pups first. She wrote about Ridge sleeping across the entrance of Darren's shelter every night, which had started on day 4 and had not stopped. And she wrote about what none of them had expected. The gifts. It started with Gravel. On the 2nd week, it dropped a smooth, flat stone near Darren's foot and walked away. Darren picked it up and kept it. The next day, a piece of cleaned bone. Then a strip of something that had been part of a prey animal. Ridge brought a piece of hull plating from somewhere. Nobody knew where, and nobody particularly wanted to find out, and set it down in front of Darren's shelter like it had solved a problem. "They're bringing you things," the lead researcher said one evening, looking at the small pile accumulating near the shelter entrance. "I know," Darren said. "Why do you think they're doing that?" Darren was quiet for a moment. When wolves accept someone into a pack, they include them in everything. Territory, food, protection. He looked at the pile. "I think this is them including me in the other thing." "What other thing?" "Having things that are yours," he said. "Being someone who accumulates." He shrugged. "I'm not totally sure. But I'm not going to tell them to stop." Sarah put that exchange in her report with no editorial comment. By the end of the 2nd month, the researchers had enough data to draft a preliminary reclassification proposal for the council. The findings were clear. Dusk wolves were not a category of monster. They were an apex predator with complex social cognition, emotional range, long memory, and the capacity for interspecies trust under the right conditions. They had simply never encountered conditions that allowed for it. Every species that had come before had come wrong. The Krellian fleet had come with 9 ships and weapons hot. The Vreth patrol ships had come armed and transmitting on aggressive frequencies. Every survey drone, every probe, every forward scout had come in ways that, to an animal that read intent through body language and sound and approach patterns, screamed threat before a single shot was fired. Darren had crouched in the dirt and waited. It was the most human thing imaginable, and the wolves had known what to do with it. 6 months after the Ardent Claws landed on Vargon Prime, the Galactic Council voted. The result was not close. 11 species, 11 votes, every single one in favor of reclassification. Duskwolves were removed from the Apex Uncontainable list and placed under Protected Intelligent Fauna status, with a formal contact protocol attached. The protocol ran to 12 steps. 12. Step 1 was, approach alone or in small numbers. Step 2 was, no visible weapons. Step 3 was, reduce all broadcast signals to minimum. The rest followed the same logic. The document had a formal title in the Council's legal record. In every other context, across every species that discussed it, it was already being called the Ardent Method. Darren was offered things. An official research post, jointly funded by the Xenobiology Division and the Krellian Science Academy, which was an extraordinary thing given that the Krellian Science Academy had never jointly funded anything with anyone. A diplomatic title, because the Council's legal team had decided that what he had achieved technically qualified as first contact under 6 different definitions. A seat on the new Duskwolf Relations Working Group, which was not glamorous but was important. He turned all of it down. He was still on Vargan Prime. Sarah went back to close out her fieldwork report in person, partly because that was procedurally correct, and partly because she wanted to see it with her own eyes before she signed off on anything. She landed on a clear morning, the kind of morning the planet did occasionally, when its atmosphere wasn't trying to kill you, and found the colony staff going about their routines with a calm that would have seemed impossible 8 months ago. There were wolves in the open ground east of the fence. 2 adults and 2 pups, the pups born 11 weeks after first contact. The first Duskwolf young that any non-Duskwolf had ever observed. They were smaller than Sarah had imagined, which was relative. Smaller meaning they came up to mid-thigh instead of mid-chest. They played the way young animals play everywhere, which was loudly and without much coordination, and one of them had somehow gotten its paw stuck in the drainage channel near the outer fence and was making sounds about it. Darren was crouching beside the channel, working the pup's foot loose with both hands, talking to it in a low, patient voice while it complained at high volume. Gravel sat a meter away watching the process with the expression of a senior pack member who had already decided this was not worth worrying about. The pup came loose. It shook itself, regarded Darren for a moment, then bit his sleeve and ran away. Darren stood, looked at the teeth marks on his jacket, and sighed. "How's the report coming?" he asked without turning around. "Done," Sarah said. "I just need your field notes from the last 3 weeks. They're in the ship." He turned around. He looked well, rested in the way of someone who had made peace with a place. "You staying long?" "Few days," she said. They walked together toward the shelter, which had been expanded at some point, a second panel added on the east side, creating a covered overhang. Under the overhang were the objects. The pile had grown. Stones, bones, a section of branch worn smooth, 3 pieces of hull plating from different ships, 2 objects Sarah couldn't identify. Everything neatly arranged, which she suspected was Darren's doing rather than the wolves. Ridge was asleep across the entrance, exactly as described in every report. At their approach, the wolf raised its head, confirmed Darren, confirmed Sarah, lowered its head again. She noticed that Ridge had adjusted position slightly, not blocking the entrance so much as resting beside it. Darren had to step over the wolf's tail to get in. "It's been doing that for 4 months," he said. "Guarding you. Keeping company," he said. "There's a difference." Sarah wasn't sure there was, but she let it go. She sat outside while Darren pulled the field notes together, watching the pups in the distance. The 2 adults with them were not Ridge or Flint. They were lower-ranked pack members, but they were there, present, moving slowly when the pups moved, redirecting when the pups went somewhere they shouldn't. She had one question she'd been saving. She asked it when Darren came back out and handed her the notes. "That first day, when you stepped out of the ship, were you afraid?" Darren sat down on the step, careful not to disturb Ridge's tail. He thought about it, a real pause, not a polite one. "Yeah," he said. "I was afraid. But you went anyway." "It was afraid too," he said. "Injured, alone, sitting in open ground outside its territory. Probably more afraid than I was." He looked out at the field where the pups were fighting over a rock. Somebody had to go first. Sarah looked at him for a moment, then down at her notes. She wrote her final line. "Humans have always been the species willing to go first, not because they feel no fear, but because they extend trust before it is guaranteed." This is what 40 years of incident reports failed to document. It is what the Duskwolves recognized. It is, this researcher concludes, the most valuable thing about them. She capped her pen. Ridge made the low, rolling sound that settled like distant thunder going quiet. It was a deeply contented sound. Sarah couldn't argue with it.